In the annals of history, one name stands above all others: Rome. A city forged in the fires of ambition, bound by iron and blood, and destined to reshape the world. From humble beginnings on the banks of the Tiber River, Rome would rise to become the greatest empire the world has ever known. This is a tale of conquest and glory, of emperors and generals, of battles that echoed across continents, and the towering edifices of civilization they left behind. But it is also a story of intrigue and betrayal, of decadence and decline. In this epic journey, we will traverse through time, from the birth of the Republic to the zenith of the empire, and witness the events that led to its inevitable fall. Join us as we unravel the mysteries, confront the legends, and uncover the truths behind the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Prepare to be captivated, enlightened, and transported to a world where the fate of empires was decided by the strength of armies and the cunning of leaders. This is the saga of Rome. This is history as you've never seen it before. What is Rome? A city that spans millennia, perched upon 7 legendary hills, now the vibrant capital of Italy. Yet rewind the tape of time, and Rome emerges differently, a nascent village nestled among the Latins beside the tranquil Tiber River. How did this humble beginning evolve into the formidable force that reshaped the course of history? Let us know in the comments what you think were the key factors that led to Rome's dominance. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Ancient Perspectives for more incredible stories from history. Its neighbors were its first stroke of luck. In what is now Tuscany, the Etruscans lived to the north. Greek colonies in the south, inhabited by an enigmatic people, whose language remains mostly untranslated. All of these communities traded with one another. It was at the intersection of their trading routes that Rome emerged. From the very beginnings, Rome has been an open city, a safe refuge for misfits, murderers, fugitive slaves. Rome provided migrants a unique opportunity to become fully fledged citizens. This will make Rome the largest urban metropolis in the ancient world. The Romans themselves thought they were ancestors of refugees from the Middle East who had survived the Trojan War. Romulus and Remus were the great-grandchildren of the Trojan hero Aeneas. Nursed by an Italian she-wolf, the brothers quarreled where to place the future world capital. Romulus murdered Remus, gave his name to the city, and became its first king. What do you think of the legend of Romulus and Remus? Is it a fascinating myth or a tale with a kernel of truth? Share your thoughts below. As tradition has it, there were 7 monarchs, each of them enjoyed a lengthy reign and left some good legacy. A calendar, a drainage system, or the Capitolium, a shrine to the senior deity Jupiter. Much of what the Romans subsequently became famous for, aqueducts, bridges, possibly even the gladiatorial games, were acquired from the Etruscans. These people had devised the Latin alphabet by altering the Greek letters for their own requirements. It's hardly surprised that their final rulers were trusting. Rome drew her military and political system from them while keeping her severe patriarchal simplicity. In 509, Rome was devastated by a sex scandal. The son of King Tarquin the Proud raped the chaste Lucretia. Tarquin was banished, making him last king of Rome. The Romans determined to avoid any such concentration of power ever again. From 509 onwards, they chose 2 consuls to serve a year apiece instead of a monarch. The consuls were governed by the Senate. This comprised of 300 fathers, patres in Latin, thus the word patricians. Those not so blessed to be born into the correct households joined the plebs. Even if they were as affluent as patricians, they were not permitted to take up posts in the state. It is amid the 200-year battle for these rights that the Republic, literally meaning public thing, would be established. The plebeians would make up the backbone of the army, and to have their own way they would threaten the young state with emigration to a neighboring hill. Each time, the fearful patricians folded in, establishing, for instance, the specific office of a representative or tribune of the plebeians. These possessed the ability to veto any decisions of the consuls. One of the primary achievements of this one was the publishing of the first written laws. By 287 BC, the plebeians had acquired total equality of rights with the patricians. The unity of Rome finds its greatest expression in the words Senatus Populus Romanus, the Senate, and the Roman people, which still adorns the manhole covers in Rome. In 390 BC, the history of Rome may have come to an end. The city was suddenly seized by the Gauls. The guard dogs had scented no danger, for which they would be crucified every year since. These awakened the final guardians of the Capitoline Hill fortification instead, sparing Rome from complete catastrophe. The shattered Romans conducted a military overhaul. The Roman legion was split into manipuli, making it more mobile in battle. The Roman army spent the following 100 years in continual battles. Instead of just exacting a tax on the vanquished, the Romans would engage into a contract of alliance with them, and the faithful allies supplied Rome with a never-ending stream of recruits. Thanks to this, the Roman legions were able to maintain their ground in combat with the most effective fighting force of the all-conquering Macedonian phalanx headed by Pyrrhus, a relative of Alexander the Great. The final stronghold of resistance in Italy, the Greek city of Tarentum, then engaged the most costly and famed contemporary warlord of the period to defend against Roman expansion. Having defeated Tarentum and reached Sicily, Rome now had to take on a much more deadly foe, Carthage, master of the Mediterranean. The Romans termed the Phoenicians of Carthage Punics, thus the Punic Wars. They were fought over the following 100 years. In 149 BC, Rome had captured the major portion of Punic land and that of their allies, but after each setback, the commercial might of Carthage would soon return. Senator Cato, the Older, proceeded to end every speech with the same theme: Carthage must be destroyed, and thus it was done. The city was wiped, destroyed, all of its residents was enslaved, purportedly pouring salt into the land as an eternal curse. Also in 146 BC, the Romans took out another city, Corinth, making Greece and Macedonia Roman territories. Rome acquired the immense resources of the dissolving kingdom of Alexander, but the patriarchal simplicity of Rome succumbed to the sophisticated Greek civilization. Greek became, in fact, a second state language. The Roman elite busied itself studying new words, hexameter, history, eloquence. Cicero, the most celebrated orator of Rome, would come to style his speeches on those of the Greek Demosthenes. However, over this large realm, full rights were only accorded to the Romans themselves. Even other Italians, the majority of the military, had no citizenship rights. These would demand equality, declare war, and obtain the right to take part in controlling the state. This was a major game changer. While ancient Greece remained a collection of feuding city-states, Rome steadily extended citizenship privileges to the conquered, laying down the foundation for an empire. Having controlled half the world, Rome fell victim to globalization. Cheap grain and an infusion of unpaid slave labor bankrupted the small farmers. These hurried into the cities and joined the ranks of the proletariat, people who have nothing to lose save their own kids. At the same time, the affluent got 100 times richer, having acquired land from the devastated peasants for a price. Previously unified, the Senate and the Roman populace separated into two opposing parties. The tribunes of the people, the Gracchi brothers, would strive to reconcile them. They recommended distributing excess public lands to the destitute peasants and offered free distributions of bread to the poor. The unhappy senators resolved to destroy the Gracchi movement by force, murdering the brothers and several thousand of their friends. Rome was beset by civil wars. Social mobility for the proletariat was promised by Gaius Marius, a popular commander. He began recruiting the proletariat into the army with the promise of a gift of land at the end of duty. This would make the legions personally committed to their generals. In 49 BC, two brilliant generals battled over Rome. Gnaeus Pompeius had gained the eastern provinces for Rome, including restless Judea, cleaned the Mediterranean of piracy, subdued Spartacus' slave insurrection, and deservedly added the epithet Great to his name. Gaius Julius Caesar had conquered Gaul. Nowadays, they would call it genocide. He murdered 1 million Gauls and enslaved as many more. He went on to beat the Germans and then invaded Britain. According to the rule, a general had to discharge his legions before returning to Rome, and in exchange enjoy his moment of glory, a triumphant entry into the city to the applause of the populace. Caesar performed a heretofore unknown move. He refused to surrender to the Senate, and having crossed the Italian boundary, the river Rubicon, marched his forces to Rome. It would take him several years to overcome Pompey the Great and his fellow adversaries, pitting Roman armies against each other. In the process, Caesar acquired more lands and granted Cleopatra the Egyptian crown. After a lovely voyage down the Nile, she would give birth to Cerian or Tiny Caesar. On his return, Caesar would add imperator, or emperor, to his name, term originally meaning victorious leader, and obtain control of all governmental roles: consul, tribune of the people, and dictator. Rumor grew that Caesar planned to make himself king. Conspiracy was forming in the Senate and Caesar was killed. Caesar bequeathed his riches, somewhat surprisingly for all concerned, to his grandnephew, 19-year-old Gaius Octavius. This Octavian quickly participated in the power battle. In 31 BC, he beat his last competitor, the warlord Mark Antony, who likewise had an affair with Cleopatra. The lovers would take their own lives. Octavian was left sole ruler of a huge area. Julius Caesar governed for 4 years. Octavian, accepting the title Augustus, meaning the venerable or the mighty, reigned for an unending 43 years. He didn't technically destroy the republic, he merely grabbed control of all conceivable offices, making his power essentially absent. But he humbly dubbed himself Princeps, the first senator. And even if clashes with barbarians persisted along the borders, inside them the period of Pax Romana set in, a time of peace and stability that was to endure 200 years. The empire had an economic upswing. Bread was supplied for free to 200,000 individuals. Aboard Augustus' instructions, a 5,000-meter pond was created at the very center of the metropolis, where 3,000 gladiators imitated sea combat aboard genuine seagoing vessels. In Rome, development was flourishing. Concrete and multi-story booming. Concrete and multi-story districts were expanding. Augustus had to adopt height rules, restricting towers to 6 stories, and yet the inhabitants were upset. They grumbled about traffic bottlenecks, contamination of the waterways of the Tiber, and exorbitant rents. The golden century of poetry dawned. Maecenaeus, a quasi-minister of culture, gave special subsidies to commend the worth of the state. Temples would be constructed in the honor of Augustus, and even a month was named after him. Thus the worship of the Roman emperors was forming. They would come to be adored alongside Mars and Jupiter. After Augustus' rule became hereditary, the Senate opposition has given us vivid pictures of the first emperor. Suspicious Tiberius unleashed horror on the pretense of the law and treason. Under this law, any activity might be judged objectionable. It was enough not to adequately glorify the emperor or pay at a brothel with coins carrying his likeness. In faraway Judea, a preacher refusing to worship the emperor as God was crucified. Caligula intended to appoint his horse a consul. A scholar and gourmet, Claudius was too absorbed with dining and the reforming of the alphabet to keep an eye on court intrigue. One of his wives, Messalina, was giving ladies of easy virtue a run for their money in the brothels, while the other, Agrippina, poisoned Claudius with mushrooms to enthrone her son from another marriage, Nero. Nero, feeling that he was a born actor, not an emperor, would eventually slaughter his own mother and then purportedly the apostles Peter and Paul. Then he again supposedly set fire to Rome so as to read the poems about the fall of Troy amid the conflagration. He would accuse the early Christians of arson and begin their persecution, and eventually he took his own life. Most specifics of this fallacy are known from Tacitus, a historian and senator who watched the disintegration of republican institutions. Fate of the empire was now decided not so much by the Senate as by the Praetorian Guards, the emperor's personal security unit founded back in the era of Augustus. These smothered Tiberius with a pillow, slayed Caligula by the sword, and hailed Claudius emperor. In all fairness, at the same time the empire flourished, spreading into new regions. Roman forces captured part of Britain, where they constructed a settlement called Londinium. Provinces were granted a straightforward taxing system, and the non-Roman nobles began to enter the Senate en masse. A grandchild of an Italian farmer, Vespasian Flavius, would become the foundation of the following dynasty. Vespasian and Titus, repressing the rebellion in Judea, committed genocide, again according to present day, not Roman standards, and razed the Temple of Jerusalem to not save the Wailing Wall. On the brighter side, Vespasian had a jolly fine Roman inclination. He charged the collectors of fee at the public bathrooms, and Titus, the destroyer of Jerusalem, would still gain the label of compassionate. After a spectacular success, Caesar opened the Colosseum for the populace. Titus would be dubbed the love and consolation of humans, and when such festivals had drained the public coffers, Vesuvius demolished Pompeii, disease decimated half Italy, and Titus became a deity. The 2nd century would go down in history as the age of the excellent emperors. Trajan was regarded by his contemporaries the finest emperor ever. Rome became a million-strong metropolis and the empire reached its highest extent. Rome linked on new territory with a network of paved highways. This structure still influences the transport map of Europe. After Trajan's victory, Hadrian involved himself with defense, creating huge fortresses in Britain and between the Rhine and the Danube. Pantheon was erected in Rome, the first temple to be capped by a large dome, a great architectural phenomenon of the day, devoted to all the gods. Hadrian would also include his sweetheart among them, the youthful Antinous. More of his pictures have survived than of any Roman. The last decent emperor, the throne philosopher Marcus Aurelius, would spend much of his reign on military missions. In between wars, he produced his manifesto for Stoic philosophy, Meditations. It was under Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus that the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, came to an end. He preferred a gladiator's glory to the business of state. Conspirators had the emperor strangled by a fellow combatant, the slave Narcissus. Rome descended into turmoil. The next 100 years brought a sequence of random emperors, proclaimed by the army, taking a turn on the throne were a liberated slave, a fortune seeker who bought the throne at an auction, General Punic descent who would place statues of the former enemy, Hannibal all over the empire. A Syrian priest of the sun, and a former shepherd who owed his popularity to his powerful physique. In 212, Emperor Caracalla, partly North African, half Syrian, awarded Roman citizenship to practically all free subjects of the empire. The concept that you might be a Roman in Judea, in Africa, or any other region of the empire at all could possibly be the principal legacy of Rome still in use today. By mid-century, Rome was already in the middle of such a crisis that the whole provinces were starting to split out. The Gauls, for instance, proclaimed an empire of their own. Order would be restored by the son of a liberated slave, Diocletian. Having begun his career as a soldier, he would finish up an absolute ruler, an extraordinary example of social mobility. Diocletian partitioned the empire into four, with four co-rulers in four capitals, positioned closer to the boundary. Rome lost its relevance. The Senate became a municipal council. The nation was now administered by an army of bureaucrats personally answerable to the emperor. Thus, the ancient world focused around the concept of a free community and free citizens came to an end. From the princeps, the first senator, the emperor had become the dominus, a term by which slaves called their masters. The citizen became a subject, the warrior transformed into a soldier, and the farmer a semi-serf. Diocletian himself resigned from the role of emperor 20 years later and went out to his farm to raise cabbages. After Diocletian's departure, the co-rulers began struggling for control. Constantine, the future Saint Constantine the Great, emerged triumphant. Before the important fight for Rome, he purportedly got a vision of a crucifix. After this, he declared all religions equal. After 300 years of persecutions, the Christians came out of the catacombs and were now permitted to erect churches beside the temples of Augustus and Mars. Constantine would transfer the cross from Jerusalem to the future capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople. Theodosius would proclaim Christianity the official religion and begin to dismantle the old temples. He would also be the last emperor of a unified Roman Empire. His sons partitioned the empire into west and east. The eastern half would live another 1,000 years and is known to us as Byzantium. The western half would fall victim to the vast movement of peoples. Rome, established by migrants, would collapse to the onslaught of a fresh wave migration of peoples. Rome, established by migrants, would collapse under the onslaught of a fresh flood of immigrants. Ironically, the last king of Rome would be called Romulus.